Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon, testimonies from reverts and converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. This week's guest is Julia Biagiarelli, who is going to take us on a journey, on a very, very fascinating, love-filled, confusion-filled, just so many twists and turns, Julia, that we've spoken about.
Uh-huh.
I'm so looking forward to it. Welcome to the program, first and foremost.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Good to see
Um,
you.
yeah, so I guess I'll start with my childhood. I'm
Please.
a cradle Catholic, a family of seven children, and the Catholic Church was really like the bedrock of our family. We went to mass regular. We on Thursday nights we got in the station wagon. We went to the confession, got in line for confession. And my early childhood was the tradition. What we look at as today is a traditional mass. We had a high altar. We had Latin mass. We knelt at the communion rail, received on the tongue. We wore our little veils to church every morning. Whenever we went to church, and and my brothers were altar boys. So, and I remember my first communion. It's just like this most beautiful, glorious, sunny day in 1966. And I remember feeling strong with Jesus that day because my mother asked me to go visit one of the neighbors. And this neighbor had a reputation for being mean, this old guy, and I was a little bit like hesitant, like I should go see him. And my mother says, yeah, he wants to see you. I'm like, so, and I went over there and he actually was very kind and sweet. And his disabled wife was there and she was kind and sweet. And they gave me the little book called Jesus Make Me Worthy. And so I remember reading the prayers in that book, and I really loved that little book. And we had all the regular stuff. We wore our miraculous medals. We had our brown scapulars. I don't know how well we kept up with keeping them on every day, but it was. And then we lived in a neighborhood where everybody was Catholic. Almost everybody was Catholic too. So that was another thing that made my childhood, very sweet. But I think what happened over the years between First Communion and confirmation is that it was the '60s and the '70s, and culture kind of pulled us away a little bit, and then the changes in the church might have pulled me away a little bit. Like I remember being about 9 years old and seeing like this some new table being built in front of the altar. And I said, what's that, Mom? And she's like, she kind of rolled her eyes. She goes, well, it's going to be a new altar. The priest is going to face us. And so I think she kind of went with the flow. She was trying not to be critical, but I could feel things changing. And before you know it, we were standing up, getting communion in the hand, and we had a rock band on the altar, and it it kind of it changed. I guess it kind of changed with the times in a way, but it also I lost my connection somehow in there and that, and in teenage rebelliousness and everything. So after I made my confirmation, I probably didn't go to mass as often. I probably didn't. We definitely didn't go to. We didn't go to confession anymore. And there was like um, we had a once a year reconciliation mass, and so and my main focus in my life in high school was that I was on the gymnastic team, and I loved my gymnastic team. And then after high school, I wanted to continue doing dance, and that became my religion, And I took dance classes, and I was performing, and then I moved to another city. And while I was living in another city, I met somebody at a restaurant where I worked, and eventually we got engaged. And I was in the midst of wanting to move to New York City, and we're engaged, and it was kind of a tumultuous time, and I didn't really know this man very well, and found out that 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother was on the phone calling his grandmother and his mother to see if they were coming to the wedding. They hadn't responded, and the grandmother goes, "Oh, he can't. He's already married. He can't get married, and he has an 8-year-old daughter." I'm like, "Oh." So I was like, it was a stressful time, but in a way, I was kind of relieved because I really knew that he wasn't right for me. But I went to visit a childhood friend. She lived in the D.C. area. I was in Connecticut, and I moved down to D.C. area just to visit her. And while I was there, I realized I was pregnant. And that's, back, and that was what, 1979, right? So it would have been, yes, actually, no, it was 1980, early 1980. It would have been like, oh, now you can just get an abortion, right? So that seemed like the logical choice. And I was going to carry on with my life. So I was, my friend's mother actually kind of took me under her wing and brought me to the women's clinic. So I went into the room to have my exam. And while I was waiting for my exam, I could see up on the wall, there's charts, and there were circles on the charts, and the circles were different sizes, and they had the weeks of gestation of, like, it was almost like what kind of tubing they used or something like that. I don't really know, but all I know is that something happened in that moment to me where I suddenly said, "Oh, what am I doing? I have a baby. This is my baby." And I suddenly just knew God was real, and I felt myself surrounded by the presence of peace and of God. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it. But, they had the exam. They told me how far along it was. I went to the front desk to pay my $10 for the visit. And they didn't ask me for the $10. They said, "All right, can you come Tuesday?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And I kind of, um, they turned away from me and went to the next person. And then my friend's mom says, "Hey, we all set?" I was like, "Yeah." And we left. And then we're driving to the car in the car, and I said, "You know what? I'm not going to do it." She goes, "I knew you weren't going to do it." And she goes, "Did you pay $10?" I'm like, "No." We didn't turn around. I didn't pay the $10, but we definitely found. So she helped me find a place to stay, which was with Catholic nuns. It was called St. Anne's Maternity Home, and I thought that was really special because St. Anne was my confirmation saint. So I lived there, and the nuns were very kind and helpful. And there was a priest who gave mass at least once a week, and he would sit with us and have breakfast. And we all had, philosophical questions to ask him, and religious questions to ask him, and stuff. And it was a really good, peaceful time for me. And this facility was bigger than, like, for the amount of women that were there, it was way bigger. It had been planned, it might have been there for many years when more women were like, finding someplace else to live when they were pregnant. But they had sewing room, they had a piano, they had all these things I like to do. And I kept myself busy. And then I had my daughter, and um, I got an arrangement to live with a family so I could, like, kind of be like their housekeeper, like a child care person, and live there with my daughter. But it didn't really work out that well. And by that time, my family, things got better with my family because it was a little bit of a strain on us, me being away there, pregnant, not married, and everything. So then I moved back with my family into the big house. All the kids were there. I think just my brother was in college, and everybody else might have been, everyone, all the younger brothers and sisters. I'm the second oldest. They were all living there, and they rearranged the whole house so that I would have a bedroom for me and my daughter. And I lived there just a few months, and then another grace from God came. Is that this little house that my grandparents came over from Italy and bought this house in a little town called Stony Creek, and it was like a perfect little apartment for me and my daughter. And the people who were living there, they had like four kids at this point, and the house was getting too small for them. So I moved in, and that was another lovely, peaceful time with me and my daughter. For a while, I didn't even have a car but I could walk to the beach and the library and the post office and a little grocery store. And then the neighbors all knew me because my dad grew up in that town, and when my early childhood, our family lived there. There was just like, we had three kids. We lived in that house. So it was very familiar, and so I made friends really easily. And I was also thinking about, now what, I need a career. So I went back to school. But meanwhile, all this time, I'm feeling closer and closer, especially to Mary and to Jesus, and going to mass and being like grateful to be back in the church again. And
How
so
how how old were you when you were
so
grateful
I
to be
was
back in the church?
so I was well, I went back in the church when I was 22. My daughter was born,
Okay.
so I moved back, and so that's about. I would say that I was 21 when I had the moment of knowing God was real, and then when I went to the maternity home, I was still 21, and my daughter was born just a couple months after my 22nd birthday. So now I'm really glad to be back in the church, and even though I didn't have a car, I also had a bike with a baby seat, so I could ride to church, on the bike, and but then at the same time, I needed to. I was living on welfare, and I needed to get a job. So I applied to college and started to study special education, and I did that and got my degree. Started working. So now, like once I started, I was in the world. I was still regular practicing Catholic, but other influences started coming in. Like, I was very interested in health and healthy foods, and I would go to health food stores a lot. And so one time, by the time I'm gonna fast forward a little bit because it's about this time my daughter's graduating from college, and I had a respiratory illness that I couldn't seem to shake off, and I was at the health food store, and there was this health fair. There was a Reiki healer there, and I thought, well, let me try it. It's something like, they put their hands on you, it can't be bad, right? And so she did something, and she gave me the certain kind of stones to wear, and um, I did feel better. But she actually gave me good advice, a good chiropractor to go to, and but that kind of got me started in the new agey kind of things, because every time you go to a health food store, they've got all the new age. They got the books, they got the bells and whistles and things there, right? The crystals and a lot of that stuff. So,
But I have to ask this:
yeah,
did you feel like that was in any way bad at the time, or you just
I
said
didn't
this
feel
is
it was
kind of
bad at
cool?
all.
Yeah,
No, I thought
yeah,
it was I thought it was all kind of cool. I thought it
yeah.
was definitely kind of cool. And they had some books on Christian mysticism in the bookstore. And I sat there one day and reading a book written by John of the Cross. So sitting there reading it in the health food store. So, um, and at that point too, so I'm getting into my mid to late 40s, and my daughter's graduating. Now I'm starting to be, let myself get a little more crazy with my friends and going out with friends and going to bars and things because they had just banned smoking in bars. So now I felt a little more comfortable going out with my friends, and I but little things like happened little by little, like, oh, I see there's a yoga class, let me go take the yoga class. Oh, there's a Tai Chi class, I'm gonna try that. And oh, I needed some extra credits for my teaching license, so I took this Holistic Health Institute, and it was like one after the other, like an aura photographer lady, the energy medicine lady, the Tai Chi person, everything you can, numerology, it was all there. And it was kind of interesting, and I was kind of attracted to that. But at still time, I was still regularly going to mass. I still really loved communion, but I also realized now that I look back, I never went to confession then. I would say from the time I made my confirmation until, like, well, I'll talk about last year, what happened last year. I didn't go to confession. It was probably 50 years that I didn't go to confession. Yeah. So I think that may have kind of influenced as well. And so then one day, I started to feel ill again. I had the Reiki teach lady. I'd seen her, like, this is like 2 years later. I started to get these strange night sweating symptoms. And so none of the doctors could figure it out. So I looked up that Reiki lady again, and I went to visit her, and she did this very long meditation, and there were crystals hanging, and I had to hold things and feel vibrations and do all these things. And um, she gave me something practical to do, which actually made me feel better with, some different juicing and things that I did. But meanwhile, she said to me, I'm not your true healer. You have to find a Kundalini yoga class, and somehow connected to that class, you're going to find your true teacher, or no, your true healer. She said. She didn't say teacher. She said healer. So I didn't know what Kundalini yoga was. I just did like the regular stuff, and so I found the class, and the teacher was pretty a strong yoga teacher, and she, lots of breathing and different things they did are very different than the regular yoga, but it was. And in the lobby of the yoga studio were many pamphlets, and I picked up one pamphlet that said it was about Christian mysticism. And I'm like, oh, and I just read that book, in the health food store, and I opened it up, and it said, yeah, we can train you in Christian mysticism, and through meditation and prayer, and you can get closer to God, and you can hear God better, and um, this is where our classes are. So I called up right away, and I went to the classes, and um, so the classes were held in someone's home, and there was a priest. He wasn't a Catholic priest, but he was dressed fully like a Catholic priest. I was a little shocked. I'm like, oh, he's dressed fully like a Catholic priest. He was very young. He was in his late 20s, but he was a very like bright and cheerful person with, all kinds of energy and love for Jesus. And he really, really did love Jesus. And I went into the class, and there were some other people in the class, and I thought they were a little strange, but this priest was so bright and so shiny and had so much, and we read stuff from the Bible, and we meditated on it and imagined ourselves in the situation, in the Bible scene, and that and then we also did something called blessing groups. So I was sitting in a blessing group, and I had my eyes closed, and the priest had his hands on my head, and some people like put their hand on my arm. They were close by me, and I was actually feeling kind of sad about feeling a lot of grief about my father had just passed a few years earlier. And I mentioned that. And then so during the blessing, I thought I felt somebody at my knees, my right knee, kneeling down, crying. And when the blessing was over and there wasn't anybody there. And I said to the priest, well, I thought I felt somebody here. And he said, well, that's the Blessed Mother. I'm like, oh, okay. And I had never discerned whether that really was or not. But I believed him because of his zeal for God, and that I really believed it. So maybe it was true. It felt good that this person was there and grieving with me. And so that kind of hooked me in. That was really hooked me in. And I kept going to more and more classes, more and more of their services. They had their own version of communion every morning at 6 o'clock, and then they had a Sunday service, kind of like not really like a mass, but they would do their version of communion. They would call it the transmutation. They didn't call it the consecration. They called it the transmutation because they were changing it into Jesus' body and blood. And they really believed it. And I thought, well, oh, maybe they really are. I started to believe them. In fact, one time I did see a streak of light come out of the air and go into the chalice when they're holding the chalice up. So I and that's another thing I realize now, that I hadn't discerned all these things, and whether or not that was some force of good or not, hooking me in. Um, so then I heard that there's master teachers that come and teach. Now there are two master teachers, and they were in charge of the group. They had known each other for many years. They had been involved in some different kind of offshoot Christian groups, and one of the leaders had been involved in Sufi groups and Hindu groups, and the other leader had been involved in had even been part of a psychic group at one point, and they were both, well versed in astrology, numerology, and they talked about that a lot in the group, and that kind of piqued my interest too, because okay, so I had in my explorations and my different little new agey things, I had really come to appreciate at the time appreciated astrology, and so that made them seem more cool. And they were called master teachers, and they would come every 3 or 4 months. They would visit a center. There were seven or eight cities around at this time. This was 2005. There were seven or eight of these centers around the country, and where people would. There was usually somebody who owned the home, and they had been ordained in this group, and they would hold services and classes and do some counseling as well. So the master teachers they lived in different cities and they would come and visit. So I was, this was the master teacher's coming. It was the woman who was a master teacher, and she came and she told these stories about her being a midwife and all these funny stories about speeding on the highway and getting pulled over when she was trying to go to a birth. She was kind of interesting person, but I, the, the priest at the center said, "What'd you think of her?" And I said, so what? I didn't think I wasn't impressed. And he told me, "Well, that's because you're prideful." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I think that was my first my little, they did their little things they would do to kind of make you, try to put you in your place. Maybe I was prideful. Maybe I wasn't, but I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I guess maybe I need to appreciate her more. But then a few months later, the man who was the other master teacher came, and um, he was much more intense, and he gave a seminar on Mary Magdalene, which felt appropriate for me because, like I said, I've been like kind of like a party girl, and I wasn't exactly following all the virtues at this point. And and I'm sitting there listening and hearing about Mary Magdalene and her, how she changed. And he read from a, what's it called, a personal the personal revelation of Maria Valtorta.
Hmm.
It was called The Poem of the Man God, and there's specific readings that talk in depth about Mary Magdalene, and that really kind of, that that motivated me to change, actually, and that motivated me to straighten up my life and to clean up my life. And I did, and I did clean up my life. And I was started going very regularly there. And then also another thing that this teacher told me to do, he told me to move. That I was living in that little house that my dad was born in. And at this point, my dad had died. My mom still owned the house, and between my mother and I, we were at odds with each other, and it was not good. And so he told me to move. And when I moved, and I told my mother I was moving, now this is after living there 24 years and raising my daughter there. Um, I moved, and my next conversation with my mother was very loving and sweet for the first time in many years. So that helped heal that relationship.
Good.
So I'd say that was one good thing about it. Um, so I continued with this group, and got more and more intense. And then when I moved, then I stopped going to the Catholic church that I've been going to,
Oh,
because I've been pretty involved in it. I was singing in the choir, I was a lector, and so I said goodbye to all the people I loved there, and then I didn't go back, and for many years I was with this group. And at one point, they had women and men as priests, deacons and priests, and because I was intensely studying, and I was put on the track to become a deacon and then a priest eventually. So I was in the training to be a deacon, and only about a year I was in it. And then the daughter of the woman who was in charge of the group was considered my teacher at the moment, so, and she was kind of mature, and she was about my daughter's age. And some of the like life things she was trying to teach me, like, I already knew. I already have to keep my car clean. Yeah, I already do that. No, I don't leave dishes in my sink or whatever. She was trying to teach people how to do. Like, I think she was trying to learn those herself, and she wasn't doing them. So it was a little bit odd. But then one day she said to me, "I got guidance that you're not supposed to be in this training anymore. You're supposed to be a sister or brother in this other little mid. It was like a group below the group. They were considered the people who were not as spiritual, and they called them the brothers and sisters. And we would do things like visit elderly. We would do things like make organized community projects and street cleanups and that kind of stuff. So I didn't want to do it right away, but eventually I did, and I actually really did get a lot. I felt a lot of love and a lot of closeness to God when I visited the old people, and I would bring the Bible and read it with them, or just pray rosaries, and I would read some passages from that, the poem of the Man God, the Maria Valtorta, and
yeah.
sometimes even Anne Catherine Emmerich's stuff. That's another one they read from Anne Catherine Emmerich. So
What was their
um,
what was their what was maybe you're going to get to it. What was their main aim? What was the,
So, oh yes,
if they're
that's right.
separated from the Catholic Church, what were they
Yeah,
trying to
so
do?
well, first of all, they thought they were better than churches, number one. Okay. And they would say so. They seemed to think that all Catholic priests had lost their whatever. They lost their ability to be really strong spiritual leaders, and that was their theory. And that they were going to teach people how to get so close to God that you wouldn't need the teachers anymore. That was their theory. You were going to be so holy that you were going to rise above, and that was, of course, the purpose of a spiritual teacher is to get the students to rise above and be close to God and just save the world basically through our prayers and good works. That's that's what they communicated to people. So then I'm in this group, and then at one point there was a new the person who the young priest had moved to another city, and a couple who were both priests opened up a new center in New Haven, Connecticut, where I was living, and I moved into there because it was like a 3-story building. Like it was like there was a storefront area, and that's where we had a chapel on that first floor. It was kind of like a loft. The second and third floors are like lofts, and
Who
so
was
the
funding this? Sorry,
so
Julia. Who?
that's another good question. So everybody's encouraged to tithe. Okay, so everybody tithed, but this couple was wealthy. They were the husband. Well, he had made a lot of money, made it, and still making a lot of money in business, and still working his job. So all these people who were brought up as priests and sent to a city to buy a house, and they used all their own money.
Hmm.
They used their own money most of the time. Once in a while, they had some funds from the group to buy some of the real estate, but most of the time, it was the couple that or the person who sent to a city to start a center would pay for everything. Like they would keep maintain like this couple they bought that building. It was they owned it. Um, so and they were encouraged by the woman who was the one in charge. She was a real estate. I don't know what you want to call her. The a real estate. I can't think of the word. Like she was the one who pushed real estate, made people buy houses, and she was going to find the houses, and she was all on it. When she come to visit somebody, we're going to find you this building. You're going to buy this. So there were some very beautiful buildings, and then the man who was also in charge, he also had a lot of experience with carpentry and painting, and so he would fix places up too. And the other thing that they both had education in Jungian psychology, and I believe they both had degrees. At one point, the man in charge he did practice psychology, so they used a lot of that techniques because like it could be when I told you how I moved out of the house I lived in 24 years. He used reverse psychology on me. He's like, he goes, you should move. Oh, you're not going to move. And I'm like, yes, I am. So that they kind of like, he got me on that one. But it was still a good choice. But so a lot of times people would come there and they would have an issue or a problem and they would get some pretty good advice for changing it at in the early stages of the group. But then things were starting to break down with the group. And there was a rift between the two leaders in 2012. And suddenly there was an announcement. So the man who was the actually the one who was more in charge kind of than the woman, I would say, says he's leaving the order, and he's leaving. And if you want him to be your teacher, you know where to find him. And he's in Chicago, so I moved to Chicago to be there with him because I had not had good experience with the woman who was the leader of the group. So um, I'm I moved to Chicago, and it was a little scary. I was in my 50s of moving out of the state where I'd lived most of my life. And but I was lucky. I mean, I got some graces. I got a job right away. But another member of the group there, I became roommates with her, and she saw this job online at a charter school in South Chicago, and it was a great school, and I worked there. But then things broke down. You started breaking down after. See, everyone's kind of excited. Oh, it's a new order. We're a new group, and the other ones are gone. And so what was happening is there was like gossiping on both sides, because I've heard from people from both sides. People went with the one leader and the other went with the other leader, that they're all like talking about each other and behind their backs, and it wasn't kindness. So but it felt new and fresh and good. But then that kind of broke down within a year, because all the property in Chicago was owned by the woman who was now had the original order, because she kept all the property, because the guy, the man in charge, he left. Because he left, he didn't take any of the property, but he didn't have ownership of anything. So she had a lot of control, and I don't think he liked that. And they acted like, oh, we're going to buy a house out in the country a little bit, out in the suburbs of Chicago. But they ended up buying some houses in Woodstock, Illinois, about an hour and a half out of Chicago. And they told us, oh, meanwhile, all this time, they're also preparing for the end of the world. And people were advised to buy lots of, buy their prepper supplies, as you most people would think of it, like prepper stuff, like food storages and water and just all kinds of things. And it got a little out of control at times, with people like having no room for their regular stuff because they had so much prepper stuff in their apartments and under their beds and everywhere else. So, so we were warned that the apocalypse was coming anytime. And so now, with this big rift over the property, and they're wanting to move. They say, I didn't know most of us didn't really know about this rift. We found out later, but what we were told in a sermon from the pulpit, we were told, well, the ministers here, in other words, the teacher and the priests and the deacons, we're moving out to Woodstock, and you can come with us if you want, but if you don't come now, you'll never get out of the city. In other words, there's going to be an apocalypse and we'll get out of the city. So people kind of believed it and rushed out of the city. And even if they didn't really, I didn't really believe it, but I also thought, well, I got to stay with this group. I moved from here, from Connecticut. Yeah. These are all my friends, and I did develop a lot of close friendships. But something else I found out, then everybody went to Woodstock. They didn't just go get apartments. People got houses, and there were 3 or 4 and 5 people, or even up to 8 people living in big houses together, which was, you can imagine how it is with adults. Things didn't go well, and eventually people did separate out into, individual homes and houses. And there were a couple places where people lived together, but and so then the world didn't end. The apocalypse didn't come, and one of the members said, well, why not? And the answer was, well, because we were so obedient, we got the grace that we have more time now. Jesus gave us more time. That was the explanation. So, okay. And I mean, there was all kinds of things. Oh, we see aliens. And so we have to watch videos, documentaries sort of about an alien stuff, and we were supposed to be looking up in the sky, and some people claimed they took a picture of alien. It was like, it's a little light in the sky. I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was, but so it was kind of like, it was weird that. And then there was another thing called Nibiru. Nibiru was supposed to be some extra planet out there that was going to come close to the Earth and make the Earth pole shift, and there's going to flood, and so you can't live up near the shoreline because everything's going to flood, everybody's going to die. Wow. So there was all these kinds of like end of the world things that were being pushed, but that never happened, of course. But meanwhile, people were living their lives, and it took me a long time to get a job, and that was and people were also cashing out savings and cashing out, IRAs and things like that, because they thought that we were told the economy was going to go under. So I cashed out some of mine, not so much that I believed them, but mostly because I couldn't get a good job right away out there in the suburbs. I could get substituting, but I couldn't get a full-time teaching job, and it took me 3 years before I got a good job. But once I did get a good job, I really loved that. It was a great school that I worked at, and I loved it. And so then the pandemic comes along. And was kind of fun because we decided we're not going to close our doors, like other churches, and we had this whole routine of somebody leaving our phones at home. We had to have the plan. We couldn't chase us with our phones. We leave our phones at home, but we would go certain places, pick up people, and meet at this one of the houses that had a big barn, and hide our cars in the barn. And then a van would come by, and we get in the van, duck down, we drive to the leader to the man who was leading the group to his house because he had a chapel in the basement, and we go in the back way. So we go kind of sneak in, and have the regular communion service. So we would do that. We did that during the pandemic, and then one day we were told, "All right, we're going to all move to Knoxville, Tennessee." Okay, so people started, packing and planning to move, and they said we got guidance to go to Knoxville, Tennessee. So I thought, well, they went to prayer. Maybe they talk about hearing from God, hearing from Jesus, and following Jesus all the time. So this we all assumed. But we found out later, once we were all in Knoxville, that it wasn't like he didn't go into prayer for that. They sat around with the Chinese divination tool called the I Ching, and they threw it out on the table, and by the way the symbols landed, it meant they had to go to a land where the three rivers meet. And so I think they must have Googled some places and chose Knoxville, Tennessee, which is so strange that, like I say, God works in mysterious ways, because coming to Knoxville was a big blessing because it was so easy to get a teaching job. I was worried I wasn't going to get it. I was going to go through the same trauma of not getting a job right away. And but so I lived with another woman who was in the group, and we were roommates. So it was easier to pay rent, and I got a job right away. It was lovely to be here in the mountains after we came from flat Chicagoland. Now we're here in the mountains, and it's warmer here, and it was kind of lovely. We did, we would take trips to the mountains and other places, and it was fun. And so then fast forward a little bit, it's like let's see, so 2022. So now it's 2022, and what I noticed is that every day, there's a communion service, and then everyone would have breakfast together. But some people had to go to work, so I didn't always stay for breakfast. But they were recorded. Every word the teacher, this man said, every word he taught to people was recorded. And so on the way home from work, I used to listen. And sometimes that we'd hear some good stuff about, some good prayerful stuff or something. But then it started to break down. It started to be berating. Like he would berate. We chose one man in the group. This man who, his wife was in the group, and they had 2 kids, and he was always berating him about, you're not a good father, or you pay too much attention to the kids and not your spirituality. And it wasn't really ever anything clear. Like in the early days, when someone had an issue, it seemed really clear when they got a teaching, like back in the early 2000s when I first came. But at this point, there wasn't a clear direction of what to do to change or what. And I'm thinking, I don't see this as a problem. I don't see this person having a problem. This doesn't feel right. So I stopped listening to those recordings on the way home from work. And then every class, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays was always a class. It used to be Tuesday was Bible contemplation. That broke down. And we would just kind of sit there and listen to this teacher kind of start talking about whatever, sometimes he'd go deep into the conspiracy theories. Sometimes he would read from an Eastern religion book. Sometimes he would read from this book called Tree of Life, which was a little more Christian centered. And sometimes he would read from the Bible, but not that often. Mostly it was just him just sitting there talking to people and berating people, criticizing people. And half the time I'm like, what is so bad about this woman? I don't see why he's telling her she's evil and she's dark, and I don't get it. And little by little, people were getting kicked out. And they were, people were wanting to leave. Some people left on their own. And then one of the really sad things is that, the daughter of the man who's a leader was married to someone in the group, and they had a child, and the child the child was diagnosed with cancer. And next thing you know, they're blaming the dad, and they get divorced and he leaves. So at first, it was like the mom and dad of the child with cancer, where they were together and they were prayerful and they were strong with the sick child. But then they started blaming the dad. Now the child, she goes between the two parents.
Oh my
And
gosh.
what the blessing for the dad was that he found the Catholic Church and he got baptized and confirmed last Easter. Yeah. So and some other people who had got kicked out of the group also got confirmed in the Catholic Church. And because of them, now that's what helped me get, actually, I think it was their prayers that helped me get back in, because I got diagnosed with cancer in, let's see, 23. So August of 23. And I started chemotherapy in September. And there was a plan for a retreat. Everyone's going to drive to Georgia to some lakeside resort somewhere and have a retreat. And one day, and here's something else they celebrated: solstice and
Mm,
equinox. All right,
mm.
yeah. So here we're at the end of the equinox service, and they're having a little discussion. And there was another woman in the group, must have had an argument with somebody earlier in the day, and she got kicked out of the retreat because they didn't like some suggestions she made about bringing food to the retreat. So she was talking about that, and and then the leader, he looks at me and he says, "And Julia, you're not going to the retreat because you're on chemo." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll be fine because I'll have, we're leaving Wednesday afternoon after they take the pump off, and I'll be able to do it. And it's my fall break from school." "Oh no, it's going to be too intense for you. You're not going to be able to handle it." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I felt kind of sad, and I went home that night and I went into prayer and asked, and I heard so clearly from Jesus, "I'm with you always. Go to the Catholic Church." I'm like, "All right, I will." So, because what it was to the people in the group, it was almost a default. Like, you can't get the communion at our group. Well, just go to the Catholic Church this time. Kind of like, that was kind of like the default. Just go there, if you think you're going to miss communion. But so it's a Thursday morning, and I was actually gonna go to a different church, but the other woman who got kicked out wanted to go earlier. She wanted to go to 8 a.m. mass. So I went to a church, um, I went to a church called Holy Ghost Catholic Church, and I walk into the church and we're waiting for mass, and then the bell rings and the priest comes out, and he's this young, bright priest. I swear, a glow of light around him. He was so holy. I was amazed. I was amazed. Almost like that young priest that I had met in this group years ago, but even brighter and so real. And when the during the consecration, I felt the presence of God, and then I went up for communion, and it was so real, and my body was shaking, my being was shaking inside, and then I noticed that one of my friends who got kicked out of the group was there at mass. So after mass, I talked to her. The other woman, she left and went to work, but I talked to her for quite some time and told her what's going on. And she says, "Well, come on Sunday to the Latin mass." So I did. I went to a low Latin mass on Saturday. I went to, the regular mass on Friday, and went Saturday, because the people would come home from the retreat on Sunday night. So I went to the Latin mass on Sunday at noon, and I was blown away. First of all, it was packed, and packed with families. So I was like, wow, these are like my family that I grew up in. They have lots of kids, and and it's packed, and it was just glorious. That same young priest came out, and there was, between the incense and the Gregorian chant and all of that, I was just I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in heaven. I couldn't wait to tell my friends when they came back from the retreat. So I'm telling them, they're like, uh-huh. Yeah, they didn't really want to hear it. I was like, I can't believe you don't want to hear this. It's amazing. And they didn't want to hear it. So, but that's what began what I called my friend who got kicked out calls it your double life. So I was still with the group because I've got on chemo. I'm going to get tired. I'm wondering if I can afford to move to my own apartment. I really want to move to my own apartment, and I want to leave this group. I know I'm going to leave this group, and I just don't know when or how it's going to happen. So what I would do is like it was class on Thursday night or something, and I would say, I'm too tired. I can't come to class. I'm on chemo. And then I would go to the church and go to adoration. Or I would go to my friend's house and watch a Catholic saint movie with her. And so that was my double life from October until March, from October 23 to March 24.
24. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it was actually, so then, one day it's like a class or something, and this was the day I say the scales fell off my eyes. I was just sitting there. Maybe it was after I was breakfast. I don't know what it was, but I'm sitting in the front row, and there's the teacher of this group, and he looks at me because you're arrogant, and I'm like, I am. Well, how am I arrogant? And he goes, well, when I told you we're not going to the retreat, you had to go and ask Jesus and get you couldn't just take the answer from me as your authority, as your teacher. I'm like, oh, well, I thought you said we were supposed to ask Jesus if we don't believe you. No, you were arrogant. So I'm like, okay, sorry for being arrogant. And that's all I said. But in that moment, it was like, oh, that was the final red flag. That was a red flag, you know, 6 feet by 6 feet, whatever it was. It was like there was no going back after that. I knew I really had to come up with a plan. So by the grace of God, I was able to talk to the people, the management of my apartment building, find another apartment in the same complex, a 1 bedroom, first floor, much nice, and they refurbished it when I moved in. So I got the brand new granite countertops, and I got the brand new fridge and a brand new sink, and it was like and brand new carpet and everything. So it was like, um, so I knew where my apartment was going to be, and I didn't tell anybody I was leaving yet. And it was the day before Palm Sunday, and there was a young man in the group who had some moving. He had a truck and he had a business of junk removal business. So I asked him for help, and I would offer to pay him to help me move just my big furniture. I didn't think they had to move all my boxes because I figured I could do that in my car because it wasn't that far from the apartment. But that day, not only did he come with a truck, but everybody came with their cars from the group. And this is something they would do regularly. They would help people move. Like everybody would do something together. Like everybody helped somebody do their yard work, or everybody would help somebody paint their house. It was like, 20, 30 people helping you do something. And so they move all my stuff into my apartment. Now, luckily, the guys, they put the furniture exactly where I told Mark, left signs for it. But everybody else just threw boxes everywhere and it was kind of a mess. But I really didn't care because now I'm moved. I'm in this new apartment. And the next day was Palm Sunday. And the meditation direction before the service that Sunday was ask God what he wants for you. I'm like, I didn't even need to like close my eyes and say God. And I heard, now it's time to leave. Okay. So I wanted to tell them while they're having breakfast, they were going to this strange rabbit hole conversation. And I can't interrupt them. And I'm tired and I'm going to go home. So I just went home and then wrote an email saying, thanks for everything. I'm leaving. Yeah, pretty much. It was longer than that, but that was the gist of it. And like no hard feelings. Because a lot of people would leave with anger, like group, because they would realize, this is bad. And they would leave angrily, or they would leave with lots of hurt because they were kicked out. A lot of people lived in fear of being kicked out of the group too. So I was so relieved to be out of the group. And then the next day, it was Monday of Holy Week, and they had a chrism mass at the cathedral in Knoxville. And we didn't have a bishop at the time, so the archbishop was there, and I think 50 priests, and maybe as many deacons and nuns and brothers, and the church was packed. And it's this beautiful new cathedral, and there's an amazing, beautiful choir, and the music was amazing. And I just felt like I could feel my ancestors, like, and my parents and everybody, like, praising God that I was back home at the church. There he was back home. It was like I was the prodigal daughter, and I was coming back, and it was like, oh my gosh, my first day out of that order, that group, and here I am in this glorious cathedral and this beautiful mass, and it was
Praise God.
amazing. Yeah, praise God, exactly. And so many blessings. So that was March, and then so I just continued my regular teaching schedule, my regular chemo, and I did some radiation over the summer. But then I was able to do some other things, like like when the Eucharistic procession that, from last summer, when it came through Chattanooga, I drove with some of my friends out to Chattanooga to take part in
Beautiful.
that procession. And that was just amazing to be there at the Basilica in Chattanooga.
I can only imagine. How was confession after 50
Oh,
years?
so that's the thing. That's the thing I did too. On that first day, I forgot to tell you. That's the thing. For my first day, I I went to confession, and it was so simple and so beautiful. I can't even explain. Like I said, hey, I was in a group of a heretical group for 19 years, and I probably even haven't been to confession for about 50 years. And you know what? The priest gave me absolution. I don't forget what the reading. He gave me a reading to read, um, and it was done. And I feel so light and so lifted up. And I tell you that I didn't think I would ever say when I was a teenager. If I look back at my teenage years, say someday you're going to say you love confession. I'm like, I love it. I love going. It's like it's almost like I can't say like it's a like I want to go and I know I need to go and then I'm a little nervous, but then I go in there and my confessor is just so wise and he also often has a funny story or something to say or like one day one day I'm like, yeah, I told my friends I couldn't go out to lunch with them, but I actually went to church instead. And he goes, well, were you not at the Feast of the Lamb? I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So I guess maybe I didn't lie to them. But yeah, so I really love going to confession. I love going to adoration. I don't remember ever going to adoration as a child. I don't ever remember that. And that was a new thing. And a lot of new things, like the Tenebrae service during Lent and like Compline and all these different holy hour prayers and things that you could do that I didn't know about. And luckily, my friend who had got kicked out earlier had been in that church for a while. She's like let me know about all these different things. And
Beautiful.
then there were 3 priests ordained in June in Knoxville, and a transitional deacon all in one mass. And I had never been to a priest ordination. And then July 26th is when the new bishop was appointed to Knoxville, and so he's going to be ordained at the downtown Knoxville, this huge, I think it's a civic center, one of the big um, buildings. So there were like I think seven. Did they say 7,000 people went to that? Oh, it was a lot. It was a lot of people.
Unbelievable.
It was unbelievable. And um, that morning I was at daily mass, and I opened up this little prayer book I have. It's a prayer book from 1925 called "Blessed Be God," and I looked at the words right there. It said, "This day you'll be with me in paradise." And I thought, oh, well, maybe it means I'm going to die today. I don't know. Well, okay, if it is, well, I'm going to be close to Jesus. And it was the 7 words that Jesus said on the cross. So that was what was on this featured on this page. And so I just kind of kept that in my heart. And I went on for my day. And then later in the afternoon, we went to the ordination. And I'm telling you, like they had folding chairs, and concrete floor. So most people were kneeling on the concrete. I think I was kneeling on the concrete for maybe 40 minutes straight, and it didn't even occur to me that it wasn't. I felt like I was in heaven, especially during the consecration and communion. I'm like, oh, he said you'll be with me in paradise. This feels like paradise right
Wow.
here. Kneeling on this concrete floor. It's in this service, having just received communion and watched the bishop being ordained. That was like being in heaven.
That's
That was such a beautiful day.
wow.
I know, it was
Wow,
amazing.
Julia. I think of I just heard this on the radio the other day. It was an old segment from Venerable Fulton Sheen when he did Life is
Mhm.
Worth Living, if you ever heard any of that, but he was talking
Mhm.
about how you can at all of divine revelation as a circle. And he said, don't forget that. I don't think he said, yeah, I think he said any group, any religious group, or any human, when they are trying to find truth, they may only have 1 degree of that circle, or 2 degrees, or 15 degrees. But his point was there is truth in there. And so you, even in that 19-year period, you were gaining things. And so I think I just like to remind people, pray for those that are obviously caught up in that,
Right.
and
Yeah.
believe that God can use all of those experiences. Especially,
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, if you ended up there, you had no idea
Right. I
how
would
you
not
end.
be in Knoxville, Tennessee, where this beautiful church is, where this traditional, beautiful church is.
Beautiful. So God did something in the midst of that, and I appreciate you sharing some of those very difficult things that happen. I mean, with some of the things that you were recounting, um, I'm not saying that this group or groups like that lead to this, but Heaven's Gate, do you remember hearing that story? And how
Hmm.
there's just more and more of the end times, end times, end times.
Right.
We know about this planet, or we know about this specific
Right.
hour and day, and we're going to catch a comet. I'm not saying that's what you guys were doing, but I'm saying you can see how
Right.
bad theology and some self self-appointed authority can
Yeah.
really get out of hand quickly.
Yeah. And
So
some people have said it's narcissism. It's actually a clinical narcissism, that all leaders of these kind of groups have a degree of narcissism. So
sure, sure.
we
So
have
we should pray for those
to
people
definitely pray.
that are out there doing all kinds of
Right.
things, and the people that find themselves caught up in it that don't know, that you don't know. You said the
Right.
scales had to come off
Right.
of
Like,
your eyes. They
yeah.
don't know.
They think they're doing what's right, and they
Yes.
they want to be close to God, and they love
Yes.
Jesus. And the one of the women who was in the group, what we every week, like while they're across the street from where they're having their service, before we go to our Latin mass, we say a rosary, for them every day, every week. We say a rosary for them every week, and
Great.
yeah,
Great. We all
yes.
say it for everyone. Yeah.
Right,
We all
right.
we all
Yeah,
need
and
it.
every
So
day I pray for the in my little prayer book, for those who are in, caught up in the darkness of what is it? I forget the exact words now, but
yeah.
um the darkness of error. That's
Yes.
what it says. Yeah, those who are stuck in the darkness of error. And so yeah, I pray for them every day. And I yeah, I feel hopeful
Yeah.
that more of them will see the light and come
Yes.
out. And
Yes.
yeah,
Well, I thank you, Julia. God bless you on what
thanks.
a remarkable journey. I appreciate your time.
Hmm.
I know that it takes a lot of
Yeah.
energy and whatnot.
Yeah.
And for you to jog your memory like that is very appreciated. So
All right, you're welcome.
I want to thank you. And everyone, please share this, as I say, and please comment and please pray as we we're talking about, for all the people that might be caught up in things like
Right.
what
Yeah.
Julia was describing. And until next time,
All
take
right.
care and God bless you.